And so the theory was, with a product, I can just build a product, make it great, and then it's almost infinitely scalable. And so there was a lot of doubt for me around that's fine in theory, but is it true in practice? Am I practically going to be able to build a product that I can scale much faster than I can scale consulting? Luckily, it turned out to be true, but there was this kind of 6 to 12 month window where the products were not growing as fast as the consulting, and so it was just that kind of like, should I
Yeah.
bring on a few consulting clients to push the revenue back up again?
Welcome to Show Me the Nuggets, where each week Joe chats with world-class entrepreneurs to find out the key principles, strategies, and processes that lie behind their outstanding achievements. Now, your host, the no bullshit serial entrepreneur, Joe Troyer.
Hey everybody, it's Joe Troyer from Digital Triggers and Show Me the Nuggets, and welcome back to another episode. I'm super excited, super honored today to have Marcus Taylor here with us. And I'm excited because frankly, I don't think a lot of you guys know who Marcus is. And to be honest, I didn't until my team brought me to his attention. And when I started going through his bio and everything that he's accomplished in his career, like guys, I was absolutely floored. So Marcus is the CEO of Venture Harbour and also founder at Leadformly. He's part of Forbes 30 under 30, and he's built Venture Harbour into a multi-million dollar per pound portfolio of over 10 online businesses with absolutely zero outside funding. So, man, congratulations! Like that's quite the freaking accomplishment.
Thank you. No, it's really exciting to be here on the show as well.
Awesome, man. So for everybody that doesn't know you, can you give like the 2 minute, 3 minute, like highest level kind of background catch up on you?
Sure. So I started coding websites when I was about 10 years old. And when I was through my teenage years, I would just build AdSense arbitrage websites.
Yep.
And I came out of school, I didn't go to university, and was really, really fortunate to get a job at a SEO agency with one of the top SEOs in the UK, a guy called Kevin Gibbons. And I
Okay.
learned so much from him working on these big SEO campaigns in the daytime. And I'd go home every night and just build these kind of experiments, build these websites to kind of figure out like where's the line with Google, like what's actually true and where's the line between what the industry says. And so it got to a point after a few years where I was actually making more money from all these experiments I'd created in the evenings than my actual job. And so I created Venture Harbour initially as just a holding company for some of these
Yep.
kind of weird little experiments. And that's over time just evolved to where Venture Harbour is today, which in a nutshell, we build a new online business every single day, every year. And we're not quite at that point. We
Yeah.
build a new one every year, and we have this goal of completely automating it within 18 months. And we have one rule, which is that each new venture we build must be more ambitious than the last one we built. That's the only rule. Besides that, everything's game.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. Sounds like an entrepreneur's dream, right? Like 18 months to build it, prop it up, set it up, and then kind of set it in the back and let the team run with it. That
Yeah.
sounds like a dream come true.
Yeah, it's and I should point out, very rarely do we actually manage to completely automate it within 18 months. But that's kind of like that's the
Okay.
goal, that's the thing we aspire to.
So I'm curious about the shift you made from going from agency and SEO to a digital product company, right? Like, did it really just happen by happenstance like that? Like you just kind of woke up one day and you're like, all right, well, enough of these kind of tests, like you said, have turned into assets, and that was the turning point.
Well, it was kind of like this bell curve thing, right? Because I when I set up Venture Harbour, as I mentioned, it was initially, this holding company for all these ventures,
Yep.
hence the name. But when the consulting thing happened organically, because when people had seen what I'd built, they said, Marcus, can you consult? Can you help us figure out how you've apply what you've done to that to for our
Yep.
business? And so I naturally built up this portfolio of clients, and it was all well and good. But then I hit this plateau. Like it was very hard to grow the revenue beyond a certain point.
Yep.
And despite all the client wins, there would be clients that obviously their projects came to an end. And so I just hit this plateau, which was quite frustrating. And simultaneously, I clients were great and all, but I always just wanted to get back into that creative mode of I just wanted to build stuff, be locked in a room for a day and just be able to create. So it was these two things that in parallel triggered me to kind of be like, okay, I think it also happened to be, I think there were like two clients that at the time were kind of just really frustrating, really, anyone
Pushed you
who's,
over the edge.
yeah, it was just kind of like, okay, enough's enough. This is not where I want to be. I want to be back in product mode. And so that for me was just like, okay, build up the product stuff so that the revenue is not it's not this huge leap. And then it came to a certain point where I just stopped trying to get new clients coming on board. And then eventually, when the last client went, we just switched over to product.
So what were when you look at that transition time, what were like kind of the keys there? What were the key challenges?
I think there was a lot of doubt around. In theory, what was in the back of my mind is the agency consulting model. There was this clear exchange of time for money, right? Like if I were to scale it, I would have to detach my kind of what I brought to the business from a knowledge perspective, and then scale the team, which was something that was just very challenging for me. And so the theory was, with a product, I can just build a product, make it great, and then it's almost infinitely scalable. And so there was a lot of doubt for me around, that's fine in theory, but is it true in practice?
Yeah.
Am I practically going to be able to build a product that I can scale much faster than I can scale consulting? Luckily, it turned out to be true, but there was this kind of 6 to 12 month window where the products were not growing as fast as the consulting. And so it was just that kind of like, should I bring on a few consulting clients to push the revenue back up again? That was
100%.
probably one of the hardest things.
I think it's such an interesting conversation because I think that so many people go through this. I feel like, and it doesn't really get talked about a lot, right? People start running an agency business or a consultant business or a social media marketing business, whatever you want to call it, right? And they're helping other people. And at the end of the day, they view it as kind of a means to an end, right? It's like, in the meantime, let me focus on this affiliate website, or let me focus on this product or service that I'm building. And it's like they're working on the bigger goal or the bigger dream. And so to see you make that transfer and that shift is interesting, and to be able to kind of dissect it a little bit is something that I think that I personally haven't ever seen done on a podcast. So this is cool. So if I were in your shoes, right, being an agency and only having an agency, let's say, which is not the case, but let's just pretend, how would you recommend to me, like, to make the switch, right? Like if you had to tell me, like, Joe, like, A, B, C, and D are the core components. Like make sure that, like, looking back, if I would have just done it like this, it would have been so much easier. Like what advice would you give me, Marcus?
I think you've got to really so I mean what we did was, fortunately, like, we were not killing it so much as an agency that in a weird way this is good. Like we were not like this really high growth agency, so we could sort of allocate a reasonable amount of time to building up the products. And I think that's the key. It's like you've got to, I know like so many agencies try to do this, and with all the best intentions, they kind of start treating this side project as like a client and scheduling X many hours a week to work on it. But you've got to really kind of be disciplined with that. You've got to kind of it's going to take a certain amount of time, effort, resource. And so I mean, if I was going through that again, I would almost hope that the agency wasn't rapidly growing, and to kind of make it an easier transition, because it's also recognizing, like, the first year or two, like, that venture is probably not going to be that impressive impact wise and revenue wise compared to the consulting side. So you kind of have to be okay with that and realize, like, this is a 3 to 5 year play. Like, This is
Yep.
going to be like your biggest client in 3 to 5 years, but the next 2 years you have to treat it like it's going to be impactful, despite it not looking like that on your accounts.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great tip. And just for some context, I guess like for me, when I got started actually with my agency and doing services for clients, like it was a means to an end. Like when I got started, it was like let me use this to learn and to figure things out. And much like you, to figure out what would work in Google and what wouldn't. And when I build a website, what were the tricks? What, how do I do this stuff myself? And very quickly, I got wrapped up in that agency business. But I was playing with ecom before ecom was cool and Shopify existed and before the huge craze, right? And was lucky enough to build some ecom businesses and sell them and move on. But it was always a means to an end. And I think that key, like what you just said, that having the time investment available and not being too busy, and being able to dedicate effort and resources and really like counting on the long term, like I can definitely say that really helped me looking back. I wasn't too busy. Like my team could run it, could manage it. We invested time and effort and resources into it, and probably for about 2 years before it really did anything. And then I was lucky enough to be able to kind of exit and duck out of it and move on to the next project. I was kind of over it. Stocking inventory and all the complexities of e-com started to really show their ugly head. So I was thankful to move on. So that's interesting. Yeah, I think that planning for it to be your biggest client was a big takeaway for what you just said, and that's definitely how I treated it. Like it got the lion's share of the love, not like the clients, right? Because the clients for
Yeah.
me were just a means to an end. So that's interesting.
Yeah,
So
the
any of
other
the,
thing that
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, the other thing that I've seen work quite well is like if the venture is like this force multiplier for the client work.
Yeah.
So like a really nice example, I think like in the UK here is like Distilled created like the ODN
Yep.
optimization delivery network software, and that's like can charge silly amounts for this SEO A/B testing software. I think Eric Su, Single Grain in the US, he's got
Yep.
ClickFlow. Like that's really an interesting model as well, because it's like they can take an SEO service, which I would imagine is kind of anywhere from like $3,000 to $8,000 a month as a retainer
Yep.
service. But then with this software that they've built, I would imagine they can charge double, triple with that. So that's another interesting approach that I quite like, is like what piece of software can be a force multiplier on the consulting, and then you can just eventually switch to just the software.
Yeah. So one of the things I always tell people is like, what's the leverage for the next play, right? That you have right now that you're not thinking about. But I actually really like the force multiplier kind of angle. I think it's a more creative type of word, so to speak. And for a lot of people, I give the example. I have a client and really close friend of mine that played in the chiropractor space as a digital marketer agency for a long time, many years, helped them run like really successful campaigns. And the entire time he was building his Facebook pixel himself too. So then, he force multiplied or leveraged that into building an e-com store for people with bad backs, right? And selling back braces and all kinds of things, right? But he leveraged the pixel that he had built over years of working with all these chiropractors that were treating people with bad backs. So I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I do a lot of kind of what you said, like Eric Sue, and Distilled. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I take a lot of the systems and processes that we have in the local agency, building backlinks, things like that, and build them up into SOPs and into software, and then I sell those. And it helps me not only, like you said, kind of sell the product for more, but it really gets my cost of goods to be in a completely different dimension where people can't compete with me, right? Like even if I wasn't going to charge more money, my cost of goods on my service business just went from 50% to 10% or 15%, and just realizing that profit margin difference is crazy for a business.
Well, it's effectively what, like, you're adding an extra 40. I guess, like, put another way, what would you have to do to kind of grow an extra 40% on your profit
Yeah, yeah,
through acquisition, or like that's an insane
for
increase
sure.
just from those kind of competitive advantages.
For sure. Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. So any other kind of keys that you would look at or things that you would think about kind of looking back?
Um, I think like from a sort of tactical or strategic perspective, I think that's really it. It's managing that transition process. Um, there's sort of two angles to it, right? Like there's a sort of the operational, keeping the revenue at a point where that sort of, you're not going into this deep dive and taking all this risk during that transition. But then there's also the sort of the emotional, psychological side of,
Yeah.
and they're very interlinked. Like I think, if you're seeing your revenue dive, it's going to be very difficult for you to go home feeling fantastic and like this is the right thing. So I think it's really sort of balancing those two. Um, and yeah, just sort of getting that transition right.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So much of business is based upon emotions and how you feel, right, from day to day, and that's gonna drive you or not drive you and help you make your decisions or not make decisions. And if your P&L, so to speak, is looking like crap because you're investing all your resources and aren't going after new business, right, that could potentially be a big catch 22. So I guess how would you fight that? I guess strategically, I guess try to get your books looking a little bit better, right? Have a little bit more profit in the business without having to sacrifice too much time on the other project, right? Your biggest client,
Mm.
so to speak, which is yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, something that we do a little bit more now, but also kind of relates to the sort of the distilled Eric Sue approach,
Yep.
is most of the ventures that we create now are things that we want for ourselves, like things that internally, even if no one else buys them, if this doesn't become a product per se, like it's still something that makes sense for us to build for ourselves.
Yep.
And so that massively reduces the risk of our R&D, because it's like, well, we should just build this anyway. This is useful. Like we recently built a kind of like a A/B testing scheduling tool, and it was just because like if we had this tool, it's going to save us so much time, so much kind of like gives us a huge competitive advantage, and it's going to cost us what, like one developer working a couple of months. It's not a huge investment and it will pay itself back even if no one else wants it. But then as it turned out, we started to tell people that we were doing this and everyone was like, oh, like we have to have that. That solves our problem. So it's kind of like this nice way of like building products. It's just
Yep.
like solve your own problems. That reduces the risk of the R&D. And then if it turns out other people want it, then great.
So that's really interesting. I feel like very early on in my career, I was very for what you just said. I feel like as time goes on, I shy away from those things personally because I feel like long-term maintenance and upkeep and brain power for me in those projects stays so high just long term that I'm just like, yeah, let me just pay for a solution instead. Thoughts on
Hmm.
that, I guess, right? Or like building something for yourself versus just saying, yeah, screw it. Like I'll just go use one of the other A/B testers out there.
I think
Like, how
it's
do you
like
draw the line, I guess?
if there's something out there that does like exactly what you want, then absolutely, like it rarely makes sense to build it yourself, because as you say, like it seems so simple. Like there's many entrepreneurs I meet who are like, oh yeah, like I'm going to build my own CRM and build my own automation system, and
Yep.
rather than paying for Zapier, let's just build our own. And it's not factoring in the fact that like the maintenance, the
Yeah.
security patches, and all the other stuff that comes with that. But the difference for me is if I can't, if there's not a solution out there already that does what I want, and I think it's kind of there's a value in me piecing that together, um, then that's where I'd build it. So the latest example for us is, so the most recent venture we've created, Serene, is so like the problem that we kind of had, and the reason why we built it was we were all struggling here to focus and get stuff done. And it got to a point where it was silly. I downloaded like Freedom to do like website blocking. I had apps for app blocking. I had Brain FM for focus music. I had Keyboard Maestro to set up all these macros. So when I pressed Command S, it triggered all this stuff and fired zaps to my phone to put it on airplane mode. And like, I was so proud of this. And it was like, this is amazing. Like, I can now just like press a button and all of this stuff happens. We even had these like Philip Hue strip lights on our desks that went red when we were press Command S to tell everyone in the office, like, I'm working, don't distract me. And it just kind of dawned on me. It's like, no one has built this, and yet this is so valuable. Like, I'm getting so much more done and so much focused. So that was an instance where we said, okay, it's like, let's just go and build that. Because it would help. It would be really great for us. We've already kind of built a hacked together version anyway and proved that it's nice. And then just by telling other people, like, this is what we've built, or they come in the office and see it, they're like, wow, that's really cool. That's kind of how I like to sort of approach the R&D side now, is like, but I think the key difference to answer your question is there was lots of solutions for pieces of the problem, but no one had kind of connected all those dots together. So that was kind of where we came in to create the product.
So on the split testing one, I'm curious, like on that product, did you look at it and you said like, this is going to have like this effect on my business, and you kind of played out the numbers? And so it was like, all right, great. Because it seems like, right, on like the time management one, kind of effectiveness one, so to speak, the other one that you were just talking about, like that's like a disruptor potentially, right? That's not like something that you're going to drop in your business and you're going to get, I mean, you're going to get results because you're more effective, but you're not going to see like dollars and cents out the other side, like A/B split testing. Like for me, those are two very different types of businesses, right? So I'm curious, like, do you view them as those two different types of business, and do you have any type of criteria, or it's just like whatever comes along and we think it's a great idea, we just kind of run with?
So there's sort of two categories for us. Like we've got ventures, which is like the example I just shared. Like Serene is very much a disruptive. It's a completely new venture, and then Leadformly would fall in that category, so on and so forth. Then our kind of competitive advantage is that we'll also buy, invest in, build technology that sits above the venture level that can be applied across all the ventures to give each venture a competitive advantage. So the A/B testing software is an example of something where we said, if we had this across all 9-10 ventures, that's going to make all of those ventures a little bit harder to compete with. And like the specific problem we were solving was A/B testing scheduling. So we found that tons of tools out there, allow you to kind of set up A/B tests. But what we were trying to do is we wanted to set up A/B tests for the next like 5 years, and to have like an intelligent like multi-arm bandit system that just said, okay, like when this test finishes, we want to find the next best alternative. And there weren't many good tools for doing that. And so
that makes sense.
It's with our whole kind of focus around, we want to automate not just the running of the ventures, but the growth of the ventures. Having an A/B testing scheduling software allowed us to kind of like automatically optimize campaigns over time, but without any human intervention.
So you got the two categories. How much time would you say you're working on like brand new tools versus things that kind of help the other businesses or software that you already have?
So the ratio that we use, we try to model it off of what Google use, which is 70-20-10. So 70% of our time is growing the existing portfolio. 20% of the time is working on like the most recent ventures, so the ones that are going to be the biggest ones in 3 to 5 years time. And then 10% of the time is kind of just pure R&D, playing with ideas, moonshots to pinch a very googly term. But that's the sort of ratio. So we'll everyone interprets that differently, but we'll make sure our budget is roughly allocated to a 70-20-10 ratio. And like I, for example, like schedule my time as like out of 10 working days, 7 will be on existing ventures, 2 on the latest venture, and then 1 day every 2 weeks.
So when you think about the businesses that you've built inside of Venture Harbor, what do you think are the differences between kind of those businesses and an agency and or digital products company with regards to like client acquisition, for example? Like we hit on this a little bit earlier, but it's like, you got to build a longer ramp time. You're obviously not making as much per customer, but in your mind, what do you think are the differences?
I think there's one big difference, which is that with a product company, the marketing is very much focused around how do I get 100 new customers today, 1,000 new customers today. Whereas with an agency, it's how do I get one new customer?
Yeah,
And so that completely changes how you think about acquisition. And I think there's a lot of benefit to actually swapping those around and having, if you're running an agency, thinking about, well, how
yeah,
would I get 100 new customers this month or 1,000 new
yep,
customers? And vice versa for a product company to think, well, what would be like the perfect system to just get one person on board and make that perfect? So it's neither one is right, but
yep,
I think the difference in acquisition for us is like we rarely think about, like I don't really speak at conferences. We don't really do any kind of like campaigns per se, like nothing that's sort of like,
yep,
spike and then nothing. Everything we do is this sort of like stackable passive thing. Like we'll implement a marketing channel that we expect to kind of perform for the next 2, 3, 5 years, and then we stack things on top of that so that the acquisition is cumulative. Whereas with an agency, I think it's very much kind of like, how do we just get the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one, and make
yep.
that kind of growth outweigh the clients dropping off.
So when you think about then in terms of like retaining clients and keeping them long term, it's really the same. I would think, and you're just working one to many versus one on one to try to retain the clients, right?
Mm.
Any thoughts kind of on other key differences between again, the agency model that you started in and kind of the digital product that you're in now in terms of retaining clients?
I think one thing that we sort of learned, particularly with Leadformly actually, which is like a marketing SaaS tool that we built, is we made a decision early on to not work with enterprise companies, um, largely for that reason. So we found that like enterprise companies, just like the retention and maintenance and management of those accounts was just it just didn't make sense for a product company like us, because we'd have to exchange so much time to just managing that and bespoking our software. So that was kind of like an interesting thing. Like our kind
Yeah.
of goal is like we don't really speak to customers too much. We don't really, across our ventures, we reach something like 8, 9 million people a year. And so there's just feasibly no way that we can
Yeah.
jump on Skype calls with customers and take them out for lunch. Like it has to be very, we still
Look,
aspire to a very good customer experience, but we have to be quite mindful about that.
yeah, it's got to be low touch. Yeah, I've kind of messed up, frankly, in that in the past. I had a software company that grateful enough again to sell. But the thing was is like way over delivered on support, which was great when we started, but like scaling and that was a big problem. It became way too big of a cost. And we were trying to do the right thing and be great for people, but like ultimately we spent way too much time and effort and money in the support department, hand holding and getting on Skype calls and everything else for a fee that didn't make sense in terms of pricing. We were kind of like we're like a bring your own account, like bring your own Twilio account type of platform. And
Mhm.
so like we just made a flat fee. And so even if we help people use the crap out of the product and get great results, like we didn't make any more money. And
Mhm.
so yeah, you gotta be careful on that side. That's a good tip for sure.
Yeah, it's very easy to. I mean, it seems exciting. Like when we had these big enterprise companies come to us, it's like, oh, what, like it's such a validation thing. And we're like, wow, and like they're going to pay lots of money. But then if you actually look at like the profit on those accounts, it's next to nothing, because there's so stacks of papers like this of like, okay, you've got to like go through all our security and integration guidelines. You're like, I need to hire a person just to look after you.
So we talked a lot about how you come up with ideas for new products. Like, are you at the stage where you have kind of a backlog, so to speak, and when it's like, all right, in 18 months we got to start another one, or in 12 months we got to start another one, and you're kind of always evaluating at this point what you're going to build and why. It seemed a little haphazard when you said you just built this apps company, right? Like, but I'm guessing with you and your background in our conversation so far, it wasn't haphazard at all, right? Like you've been thinking about this for a while.
Yeah, so so we do have a backlog of ideas. Generally though, like if something is not like if something goes into a backlog, it's like not it's very rare
Priority
that we
or
actually
yeah,
yeah, it's kind of I'd say like the most successful ventures tend to just be things that fall into like we need to build that for something else anyway.
yep,
But we do try to. There's a few things we do to kind of like systemize the sort of the innovation aspect of what we do. So one is so we take everyone on the team, in the core team at least, away to like an Airbnb twice a year for about 4 days, and on those we run like 1 day hackathons, and generally we come away with like a prototype for something that could be a new venture from those. So that's something we do to kind of just like make sure that we're always, we never get so busy or focusing on like growing ventures that we don't do that. Another is the 70-20-10 approach that makes sure like everyone's kind of doing a little bit of R&D. But then the other thing we do is like with our backlog, we've created over the years this like I think it's like 3-4 page checklist now of how we evaluate venture ideas.
okay,
So this is I think it started off as being largely inspired by Vern Harnish's like scaling up
yep,
1 page strategic plan, those
yep,
kind of things. And just over time, we've sort of like every time we read a good book, like Peter Thiel, 0 to 1, or like anything that's like good for like evaluating, is this not just a good idea, but a good business idea? We'll kind of pinch
yep,
those questions or concepts and just add it to our checklist. And now it's like after several years of doing that, our sort of new venture checklist it's pretty brutal, and it's very difficult to get an idea through it. So it's like when we do get an idea that ticks all the boxes and gets through it, we know like, okay, this is something that we should definitely go ahead with. And I think because we've got at a budget perspective, we aim to invest about 20% of our revenue per year into innovation and new projects. It's kind of like we've got this pot of money is assigned to that every year, and it's kind of like we have, as far as I'm concerned, like we have to spend that money to stay relevant. So it's sort of that makes it a lot easier. It's not like, oh, like I've had this good idea, now I've got to think about the money. It's like the money is there. Now
yeah.
I've got to now come up with the ideas that justify spending that.
Looking at your team now, what's kind of the makeup of your team? Like how many people are developers? Like what do you have in terms of marketers? Or could you break down kind of high level what your team looks like?
Sure. So the core team is very, very small. So there's 5 of us going on 6. So on the core team we have myself, CTO, backend, like head of backend developer, head of front end. Then we have a marketing manager, um, and a head of product who kind of manages the overall development across the ventures. So
Okay.
that's like the core team who are largely involved in all of the ventures. And
Okay.
then we then have sort of these hubs of developers or marketers, which is elastic. It kind of we scale it up and down depending on what's relevant, what the kind of quarterly goals look like.
Yep.
So it really depends. I think at the moment we've got something like 27 like
Wow.
external people,
Yep.
which is mostly developers or DevOps or
Yep.
QA, like mostly development focused.
So when you run one of these products and it doesn't go well, is it like, all right, just back to the drawing board? Or do you ever can the project, or is it just like, hey, like at least it's going to work for us and it's going to be a cool side project? Or like if it doesn't go well, I guess what's your train of thought, or how do you proceed from there? Like, because I mean, I'm sure you've been there, right? Like, this is going to be great. And then you're like, yeah, this sucks. Like, yeah, the development didn't nail it on the head, or we're not quite there. The market doesn't really want it, or, right? Like, I've been there firsthand, right? Like, I've had to delete a product, so to speak, and drop it. So I'm just curious, kind of your thoughts on that side of things.
Yeah, so it's very kind of varies case by case depending on the sort of the type of lack of success. So,
Yeah.
I mean, two examples to kind of illustrate like the different approaches. I think 3 years ago we created one of the ventures was like a website hosting insider. Like it was like we had a lot of success with like a financial comparison site, a CRM comparison site, and so we were like, okay, like we sort of know this model works. Let's apply it to the web hosting space. And the thing just completely flopped. Like it just did not work. We had just not accounted for like how hard it would be to compete in that space, despite having kind of done it in the Forex space. So we were kind of like, quite,
Yep.
I wouldn't say cocky, but we're like, well, if we can do this in the Forex space, like web hosting is fine. And yeah, it just completely flopped. And I think within a year, we were just like, nope, we're not going to put any more like development time into this. We're not going to waste our time. Let's just forget this ever happened and move on to the next thing. So that's the worst case scenario. Is kind of like we just can it and just say this is not worth it. A slightly more kind of interesting one is so like with Leadformly. Leadformly was not as successful as we expected it to be, but it's still actively running as a venture. We still have a development team actively behind it, but we weren't the MRR growth was not as strong as we had hoped for. But it's still it's still a profitable venture. It's a meaningful part of our portfolio. It's just it's not the sort of where we had expected it to be. This kind of big venture that represents where our growth is going to come from. It turned out to just be kind of like this supporting venture that, it's great. So it's a really great product and we use it ourselves, and it's got a kind of quite a niche group of customers that love it, but it's not this kind of like transformative, the next whatever, like it's not kind of taking that side.
Yep. So when something goes well, like Leadformly, but doesn't quite have the MRR growth, like for me, my entrepreneur ADD brain would be like, this is great. Let me get to a point where like it's systematically growing, and then like let me get rid of it at the right time, right? Because I should be focusing on things that have that explosion of MRR growth, right? But you have definitely more of a mindset of a portfolio, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So
Thoughts on
it's
how
like,
you like keep that going day to day, and like you aren't like trimming your portfolio, or like, hey, like this venture is obviously not doing as well as the others, or I guess thoughts on that side? I think you view it very differently than I would. And so I'm curious. I think like I think my tendency would be to like constantly be like, trimming things, or like, yeah, this one's good, but not what I wanted. Let's get rid of it, on to the next.
yeah. So, I mean, we have a kind of a rough goal of create a new venture every year, sell one every 3 years. It's the sort of rough
Okay.
ratio. So the portfolio is always kind of growing on average, but we are trimming it.
Yep.
But there's no, I guess the way, like it's very important for us to have nice cash flow and to be cash positive, because that also changes our R&D budget. So a venture
Yep.
like Leadformly is quite interesting because it's, we can sort of systemize it. It's not this like a normal, crazy explosive growth, but it does sort of keep the pot of, a cash topped up, so that
Yep.
when we allocate the 20% to R&D, it's like that number is going to be a bit higher, and so we can maybe be a bit more ambitious, a bit more aggressive with the new ventures that we do expect to be.
So you talked a little bit about kind of driving traffic. I'm curious, since you guys are in all of these different verticals with all these different types of products, really, how are you driving traffic? Like, because isn't that changing kind of from product to product to product. I think half of the battle is just cracking the traffic and conversion strategy, so to speak, for each of them.
Yeah, so the sort of the common thread is we tend to lean quite heavily on SEO and content marketing. That's definitely a kind of an area where, I mean, coming from my background, that's sort of
Yeah.
what I was doing. And it's got easier over time in a way, because with each venture, roughly the ventures are all kind of serving, with a few exceptions, they're all kind of serving roughly the same audience, like generally entrepreneurs, digital marketers.
Okay.
Even like the latest one, like Serene, even though it's kind of productivity, it's the people that
Yeah.
tend to like that. It's
Okay.
most of our audience are entrepreneurs. So, we're at a point now where across all the different ventures, we have an audience of sort of 8 to 9 million people a year. Like the Venture Harbour blog is very active, and so we have a lot of people through that. So that's generally like the first sort of how we get the initial traction, is leveraging the existing audience that we've built. And that's a big consideration when we launch a venture, is how easy is it going to be for us to for this to be of interest to our existing audience. And then from there, we try to kind of then build those stackable acquisition channels. PPC is something that we've never really cracked, and it's insane because it's like it makes so much sense for our model. But that's the next big challenge for us is cracking the sort of the PPC side. But yeah, today it's been mostly SEO and content.
Okay. So I'm curious then, so Venture Harbour, obviously you have all of the audience, so to speak, kind of all following Venture Harbour. So if somebody comes in and they buy Leadformly, I'm assuming, in the first week, the first 2 weeks, the first month, at some point, right? Like I'm going to get an introduction to you and to the parent company, right?
Yeah. So some more so than others, but generally, we'll sort of, there will be kind of touch points for different ventures.
Okay. So then when you launch something new, obviously you bring something out new, then you are able to kind of push from Venture Harbour or any of the other brands to the new opportunity or the new release.
Yeah. So like the model that like we kind of aspire to and really kind of look up to is Atlassian. So
Okay.
Atlassian, like, they've got Trello, Jira, Bitbucket, Bamboo, like, and it's kind of amazing because like if you use Jira, it's like very integrated with Trello and Bitbucket, and these are all like fundamentally different products, but it feels very integrated. And so that's kind of where we're looking to kind of head.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, when I look at my business, I think it's very similar in some ways. Like my main brand is Digital Triggers, but then I'll release software out of the Digital Triggers brand. But ultimately, the goal is to get each of them to kind of live on their own outside of the brand and be able to be marketed outside of the brand. So it's not just me and my face, that the company is leaning on, right? But yet kind of strategically the team as well. So definitely, I'd say we've got down the process for that initial rollout, and we do like the launches really well and the affiliate game really well. For somebody like me, content, it sounds like an SEO then for the individual ventures is probably where you would spend your time next. Is that right?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. And so if you had to tell me how to go about the SEO and content for those ventures, like what would you say is like what's worked for you guys or what hasn't? Where would you tell me to spend my time or effort?
There's like two broad strategies that I love, and generally I would say that they're just as effective today as they were like 6-7 years ago when we started using them. One is just like like 10x content. Like we'll spend like our general rule of thumb is like if we're going to spend less than 40 hours on this piece of content, it's someone's going to beat it. Like eventually someone's going to be like, yeah, like let's pay our agency to like make this a little bit better and outrank us, skyscraper, all that stuff. So generally we're kind of like, how do we make this 10 times better than the next best piece of content on the internet? And that makes it very, very economically difficult for anyone to compete with that piece of content. That
Yep.
work if we're going after something very competitive, like if we want to rank number one for like marketing software or forex brokers or something like very competitive, that would be generally the approach we take.
Okay.
The other strategy that has worked very, very well for us over the years, and it's harder to get right tactically, is like massively scaled automated content. Now that sounds like, I'm sure anyone with a remote background in SEO, hairs, going up on the back. Like this is why it's important. Like you have to get it right, but if you get it right, it's insane. So an example of this, one of our websites, Broken Oats, which is kind of the black sheep in the group. It's like the one venture that doesn't fit everything I've said. It's like financial comparison.
Okay.
But with this site, we created like 7,000 pages that were completely automated, automated content, comparing different brokers. So like if you want to find, without getting into all the jargon, like let's say broker A versus broker B, let's say there's like 300, 400 brokers that exist, creating like every different combination of broker comparison, taking every single possible feature you could look at in a broker and creating a comparison around that feature. We were able to like build out a data set and generate content in a way that was genuinely useful for the user. Like if it doesn't look automated.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it still meets that criteria of like it's a genuinely great piece of content, and we would go and rewrite bits manually if it wasn't, but that's
Yep.
been very, very effective.
Okay. So yeah, I've been able to leverage that second type a couple of times ever in my lifetime as a marketer, and I think once or twice it's worked out and it's worked really well. The rest of the times, yeah, it just didn't come out so hot. Lots of R&D time, but didn't quite get there. And I think at the end of the day, for me, when I look at why it didn't get there, it wasn't valuable at the end of the day to the user. Like it was just us trying to quote unquote like game the system, so to speak, right? Like how do I get, 500,000 pages indexed by Google, over the next, 90 days? And that was the goal instead of like you said, like focusing on the user experience and is this going to be really helpful?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like there's so much to be said for like we put so much emphasis, particularly if we're going down that route, into things like getting like the design beautiful and like really putting a lot of effort into just understanding like what's the intent behind what people are searching for here. Like what do they want to see? How do we kind of go above and beyond? Because exactly as you said, like I particularly more in like when I was doing SEO consulting, I was working with like property aggregators that generate like 8 million
Yeah.
pages for every query, and like it just gets slammed. Like it's not what Google wants. It's not what the user wants. And generally,
Yeah.
if you're not ticking those two boxes, then yeah, it's not gonna be pretty.
So it seems like for most of these ventures, definitely content marketing is the key. And it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but mostly quote unquote skyscraper type of content, for lack of a better phrase. I just say it as that because people know that term, right?
Yeah,
So linkable assets, right? And like you said, something that's going to do better than everybody else. Like they won't touch it because of the amount of work involved. Is that
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay. Anything else that's been notable in terms of marketing or marketing channels or systems or processes or things that are really working for you guys at Venture Harbor in terms of marketing? Like you're obviously getting on a good amount of podcasts, right? Is that a channel that's been working to get you guys some business and get your brand out there? Or
Podcast is a very new one. So the jury is kind of still out on that side, and there's kind of like mixed goals with that, right? Like it's partly a personal branding thing. It's also like seeing how does that affect with different ventures. But I'd say like one thing that has been perhaps unsurprisingly effective, but nice from an automation view is we've done a lot of stuff with automated webinars, like evergreen webinars, which has been a really effective way of like it was good for Leadformly, because Leadformly was like, we saw that there was an increase in conversion rate if we had spoken to a customer. Like there was definitely a degree of, this is sort of expensive, so I want to make sure that this is right, and I want to trust the company behind it, and all this stuff. But obviously, it's not such a high cost that it made economic sense for us to jump on Skype and speak to customers.
Yeah.
So we tested automated evergreen webinars, and it was really funny because initially the conversion rate of the webinar was not as good as us giving a manual demo. But it was still higher than if they hadn't. But over time, we A/B tested like chunks of content in the webinar and tested different slides, different offers, and eventually we were able to get the conversion rate of an evergreen webinar to be higher than me actually speaking to a person. Which I don't know if that says more about my ability, my sales ability, or the effectiveness of evergreen webinars, but that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's like every startup's dream, right? When they're hustling and they're grinding and they're trying to get to the next level and they're running all those demos and one-on-ones, like to be able to beat that with an automated webinar, like that's saying something, man. I think that's definitely an accomplishment for sure.
Well, you've got one big advantage with the evergreen webinar, which is that you can measure and optimize. Like you can change a different kind of
Yeah.
way of explaining the product every week. Like so, it's harder to do that with manual demos, because so much is going to be like, how are you feeling that day? How is like, there's so many variables that are out of your
Yep.
control.
100%. When you look at your business, what are the core like fundamental five, six, seven, even 10 like systems or processes high level that you think truly run your business and are the most important things? Like you've mentioned a lot of little takeaways, like this cheat sheet, that piece of content, this checklist that we go through, and it seems like your brain thinks in that way, much like mine. I'm curious, like what are the core systems or processes that you have, or resources or assets in your business that like you think are big wins? Like when you go come up with another idea, it's like, yeah, these 5 things I'm gonna pull into this business, and automatically we're already like shooting out of the gate, right, at 100 miles an hour versus starting at 5, right? Like what are those big wins, so to speak, or the core things there?
So I think one of them is, so we use Confluence as like a internal like our
Yeah.
ops manual, if you like. And
Yep.
so that's like in Confluence we've just got like a lot of these sort of like when we create a new venture, it's just like empty documents for things that we just found useful to fill out. So like Salesforce's V2 mum document, which is like
Okay.
vision, values, method, obstacles, measures. So things like
Okay.
that, like we'll fill that out, and then that just makes sure like we're not going to get too wrapped up in execution and like figuring out campaigns before we figured out the bigger picture. Like, what's the vision here? What are we going to
Yep.
stand for? How are we going to do it? So things like
Yep.
that are really valuable, and having it in Confluence just as a sort of an ops manual just makes it easily repeatable. And like, if I'm not here, someone is going to be like, oh, why doesn't this venture have a V2 mum document filled out? So that's quite a key one. We use Breezy HR for our recruitment process, which automates a
Okay.
lot of like using scorecards from like top grading
Yep.
methodology. That's been really good for just, it basically has turned our kind of recruitment process into more of like a CRM pipeline. So we have consistent processes for how
Yep.
people get to the next step. What else have we got? I mean, there's at a sort of like a tactical day-to-day level, like so much of it's maybe not like the sexiest or most interesting, but like we use Active Campaign as like a backbone for so much of like the automation that we do day to day. And just Zapier, like I think we've got some ridiculous amount of Zaps set up. And what I would kind of encourage is like, because I know, I mean, most of the people listening to this podcast, I'm sure, are like very familiar with Zapier. But what I've kind of noticed is less people are familiar with like some of the more unusual features in Zapier that are the things that kind of add a lot of value for us. So like specifically Zapier's like the Zapier's their own kind of little functions. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
they've got conditional paths, formatter. You
Yep.
can run like Excel functions inside a Zapier trigger. These things are just game changers for us because like when we built the A/B testing software, we actually built the first version almost entirely in Zapier, which sounds insane, but because you can run like Excel
Yeah.
functions and like run JavaScript, and
Yep.
you can just say like, okay, when I add a new like post in WordPress, run all these functions, all this JavaScript, figure out like the best title, and then schedule that in a MySQL database for like the next 5 years. So like getting really kind of into the nitty gritty with Zapier just
Yeah.
for us like speeds up innovation, and there's so many little things that funnily enough like we build a lot of tools in Zapier that then we then ultimately end up like paying other SaaS companies to use. Like Receipt Bank is a really funny one. Like we built like a version of Receipt Bank a few years ago where like anytime we like took a photo of a receipt, it stored it in a Google Drive, did like the text recognition, then sent it off to Zero. That we just built a Zap to do that a while ago. And then our accountant came in like a few months ago and was like, oh, you guys should use Receipt Bank. It does this. We're like, oh, well, cool. That's probably a more stable way of doing it. But like we've built our own. So like that's like a really useful thing, I think, for just
Yeah.
very quick, dirty innovation.
Yeah, I love that. I found so many times you can do that quick, dirty innovation using Zapier, and yeah, I agree. Nobody's doing it. I'll take a quote from a developer on staff, and they'll be like, it's going to take 40 hours to do this, and I'm like, well, why don't we do this instead? And basically just have the backbone be Zapier. And they're like, yeah, that would take me like 3 hours. I'm like, yeah, let's do
Yeah.
it that way. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's
it
really
makes a
interesting.
huge difference.
Okay, cool. So then we kind of got into this, but like marketing stack then for all these companies, like you said active campaign and Zapier, obviously. Like, does Venture Harbor have an active campaign account? Then every actual company has one as well, right? Or how do you do that? And then kind of what's the tech stack look like that you use from company to company or site to site?
Yeah, so we tend to have most of the software and the tech stack at the parent level, so at the Venture Harbor level, and then that's used across all the ventures. So Active Campaign is like the sort of the backbone to everything. It's the central CRM, it's the automation software, like everything comes off
Yep.
Active Campaign. Um, and then it's really case by case. Like the only other one that I would say is kind of roughly is sort of kind of equivalent is Unbounce, which we
Yep.
just use for sort of rapidly getting up landing pages. Um, Besides that, it's very venture specific, and we're to be honest, we're probably lighter on the sort of the marketing tech stack than we could or should be. We use ClickFlow, which is the Eric's A/B testing
Yep.
software, which has been
Yep.
really valuable. Um, but yeah, I think because like so much of what we do is SEO and content focused, it's really I guess SEMrush and Deepcrawl and those kind of things
Yep.
also fall in that category. But it's kind of like we'll sort of hypothesize like how do we take this like 10x bigger? Like what do we need to do? And generally that involves like bespoke development, hiring writers, creating like really good content. So it's often not a tooling or tech problem. It's sort of like a
Yep.
development thing.
Okay.
And so we're very heavy on like our sort of like development tech stack is slightly ridiculous, but the marketing tech stack is quite
Okay.
minimal.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then when you're running, I guess, like, are you treating each of these as separate businesses, or are you kind of running all of the revenue through Venture Harbor and the parent company?
So there's different. The structure is like quite. It varies from venture to venture. So like Leadformly is for example, it's a completely separate
Gotcha.
company.
Yep.
The only relationship between Leadformly and Venture Harbor is like a service agreement between the two.
Yep.
Um, Broker Notes is a subsidiary, so we have that as kind of like within the group where Venture Harbor is the shareholder. So it kind of like depends venture to venture. Like a lot is going to be dependent on, what our future plans are for the venture, where we want the sort of the liability to sit. But generally,
Yep.
we're moving a little bit more towards when we're incubating new ventures, they sit in at the Venture Harbour level, and then when they hit a threshold, that's when we spin them out as a separate company.
So that's kind of how I started doing things, is kind of in an incubation level and testing level, and then once it hits X in terms of revenue, right? My idea was to then pull it out and remove it. I found though like some sticky problems in doing that just personally. Email deliverability issues and moving billing becomes a nightmare. Have you had to
Yeah.
go through that, and kind of how'd you deal with it? Like moving the billing alone and the merchant processing stuff with recurring, like, oh man, I wanted to claw my eyeballs out. Like one of the worst experiences of my life.
Yeah, it's not. It was a really big learning actually. Was the first time we spun the companies out. It was our well-intentioned accountants and lawyers were like, yeah, this makes loads of sense. Like this is way more safer and like it will keep things nice and clean. And the first time you do it, you're like, oh, accountant knows best, lawyer knows best. Let's do that. And then suddenly we got to a point where it's like, okay, now we've got like in the UK we've got VAT, so it's like three separate VAT returns, like everything just tripled in terms of overhead and admin. And so it just got a little bit ridiculous. And so now it's like my temptation is to keep things under one company for as long as possible. But when it hits a trigger where it's like, okay, the increase in admin is worth it, either because we're expecting an exit for this or there's some reason for us to kind of like spin it out, then we'll do so. But it's not something, if I had gone through the same thing again, it's not something I would do lightly. Like it's definitely creates a lot of extra problems.
Yeah, it was a heartache for me. I still feel like I don't have the best solve or best solution. But yeah, definitely a heartache, and something that I think about like every project and every new opportunity I'm working, I'm like, crap, like how do I think this one through? And I don't think that there's any right or wrong answer, right? Like it's just what's, depending on the situation, what's the best practice. But okay, cool. All right. So any other automation tools that you use? You mentioned a couple. We talked about the marketing stack. You talked about the split testing. We talked about SEM Rush. We talked about Active Campaign. I think that was kind of the key.
The only other one that it's a little bit of a controversial suggestion, but for the more technically inclined, there's a tool that I love called Ghost Inspector, and I love it. These guys have built something amazing, but it's built as like QA testing software. So the idea being you record like a video of you going to the homepage, clicking a button,
Yep.
and take you to a pricing page. And then every day that test will run and make sure that when you click that button, it takes you to the pricing page. So you can build hundreds of these tests and just make sure like nothing in your website or app is ever breaks. That's what
Yep.
it's designed for. I say controversial because like I'm fairly certain I may be breaking their terms of service in various ways, but I love using this software to just like automate random things. Like if I want to check flights, I'll set up like Ghost Inspector tests to like every day, like go to this, like extract the current price and put it in a Google sheet. It's kind of like in combination with Zapier, because you can trigger like Ghost Inspectors to run
Yes.
from Zapier. You can do all kinds of fun stuff. And again, it's another tool in the toolbox for like rapid innovation, where often my team will be like, oh, like, yeah, like let's, we can set up a Ghost Inspector test that every day or every hour goes and like gets this and pulls a hit. So I love it. It's really, yeah.
It sounds like an amazing tool. My head's starting to go, but forgive me, it's really early here in the morning. So help my head spin a little bit more. So obviously it's integrated. I see that there's API access, but it's also integrated with Zapier, which is great. So we can kick it off through there. But what other kind of cool things are you doing just to get my brain going in terms of use cases?
So one thing you could like, one thing I experimented with for a while was like every day going to like Product Hunt and extracting like what are like the top 5 products on Product Hunt, extract like the
Yep.
categories, and then like go to a Google sheet, and then if there's anything that like I'm interested in, and I'm sure like Product Hunt has their own like notification system for that. But the beauty of this is like I was able to kind of like do a little bit more an
Yeah.
analysis on my side to like do better filtering. But it's the world is your oyster. Like I'm reluctant to share some of the some of the things we've done because I'm sure they may be a little bit more of the T's and C's. But
Yeah, for sure.
in essence, you can go to any website, click things, extract stuff, take screenshots of the page, and then return that to you. So you can use your imagination as to what that could be used for.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, that gets my brain going. Yeah, and I've actually never heard of the tool. So great share. I love when somebody's so excited about a piece of software and I've never heard of it. It's like Christmas, right? Like,
Yeah.
so good stuff. Thank you for that share.
What
Um,
what's
so
so
um,
on sorry, on your like is there anything that you've come across recently that you feel similarly with?
you use a Mac,
Yep, yep.
Crisp with a K, KRISP.ai is a game changer for me. So simple, but essentially gets rid of all your background noise and makes your audio amazing. And it's
Oh
just a
wow.
Mac app that's just a Mac app that's free. You can't hear typing, you can't hear background noises. For me, like I'm recording and on meetings all day, every day, and like this little app has like revolutionized like my meetings and my recordings like sound 10 times better, and all I did was
Wow.
like 2 clicks of installing this app. So for me that's like the latest one that's been like so simple but a game changer. So what's the future look like, Marcus? Like obviously you've built an amazing foundation, you've done some crazy things in business so far. I'm curious, like what's your vision and what's on your mind? What's next in business?
So for me, the goal is to have 100 businesses under the portfolio by 2100, or to have created 100 by 2100. So that's and the one rule that has to kind of remain true across all that is each one being more ambitious than the last. So that's the thing that kind of drives me and excites me, is this idea of like, okay, like in 2100, the level of ambition behind the ventures we're creating is going to be geometrically like insane compared to what we're doing today. So yeah, that's the vision. I don't know what those ventures look like. I don't know where it's going, but it's for us. It's just this journey of using the creation of these ventures as a vehicle for personal growth. So the whole reason I do this, the whole ethos behind Venture Harbour, is just that we're creating these ventures to grow ourselves, and then the value that adds for other people, and the human potential that we unlock through the ventures we create. That's an added bonus, but it's really about like the personal growth in for us on the team that we're kind of creating. That's the real driver. So yeah, it's just kind of I love what we're doing, and it's just continue doing that, but at a bigger level.
So I love that. I'd like to spend a second more on that if we can. Um, I think that's amazing. Like, I think that so many people are thinking about the end result instead of the journey to get there, right? And they're not worried about being better themselves and personal growth. They're just like worried about the end result, which is money and an exit or whatever it is, right? It's like, yes, um, this is the goal, and that's all that they think about. So when you so that's amazing. First off, just like I love that attitude and mindset. How do you keep that forefront in your mind and in your team's mind, and how do you get that buy-in? I'm curious from your team, because it's one thing for you to think it, right? But it's different for your company to really embody that and to run with it. And I love the mindset, and I would love to run with something similar. But I'm just curious how you really seed that into your team and your culture, so to speak.
So I mean, it's funny because it's kind of like it's just one of these like given things. It's like this is what it is. if you're at Venture Harbour, it's a given that you've bought into this. Like this is not debatable. This is not a negotiable point. Like this is what we're doing. And if you're here, you're a part of that. So, I mean, it kind of goes a step back, right? Like it's the people that join the company must be like on board with that. And so in our hiring process, like I'm very, very clear about this. This is, we're not doing this to exit. We're not doing this for like these very kind of, this is not like a 3-5 year play. Like Venture Harbour is very much this, we're playing a long game, and this is about personal growth and everything that we do. I would like to think that if you ask any of my team members, like, is there some like bullshit thing that we stick on the wall and say in podcast interviews but don't do, or is this like genuinely like how we act day to day? I would like to think that they would say like, yeah, like Marcus has done some weird things that genuinely support that. Like we really do stand by the fact that personal growth comes above business growth, and it's they're very, very kind of intertwined. Because it's for me, I've often struggled with like, why am I doing this? Like, what is the vision? And there's a temptation to like have this sort of very sort of Silicon Valley-esque statement. But for me, this is authentic. This is just true. This is what I believe in. And so I'm not going to come up with, some, inauthentic statement that sounds nice, but this is what it is. If you want to join my team, if that's kind of, if you find it exciting, perfect. But if not, like, it's not right.
So I think probably being like polarizing in your hiring, right? And saying this is who we are and this is what we believe in. People are either going to cling to that in the interview and be all over it, and start asking questions and really digging into the details. And those are the people that you're wanting to hire versus the people that are like, all right, great, when can I start? You're like, see you later.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's so clear. Like you can just tell so easily whether it's like genuine excitement and enthusiasm, or if it's kind of, I mean, it terrifies a lot of people. Like a lot of people, the concept of basically their role changing every year, different venture, different challenges, that's terrifying to a lot of people. And so it really does take an unusual kind of person to work here. And we have to be polarizing to find those people.
So when you think about staying competitive, right, at Venture Harbour and you guys staying on the bleeding edge, right? Like what do you consider, what are you thinking about that? Right? Like with that strive to always be better, like who are you following or just kind of what's your mindset, I guess, thinking through that?
So I think this is where I put a lot of kind of my focus on like developing myself as a leader, but also coaching my core team to increase the sort of the capability of the team, because I think they're the two sort of ceilings that will potentially cap our competitiveness. It's the humans in the business driving all the decisions. So at a personal level for myself, to make sure that I am lessening the bottleneck that I create, I make sure that I go on at least like 2 or often 3 like immersive learning events each year. I just did the executive master's program at MIT, which was just, a week of just drinking from a fire hose, but from like some of the best like teachers and trainers in the world. And so for me, it's like, that's just the motivation, the learning from things like that helped me kind of break those limits. And then at a team level, it's coaching my team and making sure that we really heavily invest in everyone's personal and professional development, so that equally the team do not become a bottleneck to our growth. As long as we get those 2 things right, then we should never kind of hit this point where we're not, we don't want to be messed with. Like we want to be kind of ultra competitive and 10x better than our competitors. And so it's really sort of just making sure we're all developing ourselves personally to prepare for that.
So I'm cognizant of time. I feel like we could go on for another hour or 2, but I'm cognizant of time. I want to wrap it up. I appreciate you coming on, spending so much time with us, and I want to wrap it up with one question. on the end of like every podcast, I feel like everybody asks the same question, like, what book would you recommend? What 3 books? And I think that that's great. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm an Audible junkie. Like, I'm going through a couple books a week, right? So I love that, but I change it up a little bit. So I wanted to ask you, like, what's the one book that if you look at like your business has made the biggest impact, like directly, not like I read the book and I thought it was a great book, like which has had the biggest impact on your business? So like I just got done reading like David Goggins' book, right? Like, but that's more like me and self-development for me. That's not so much about the business. And so I can't correlate in the business how big of an impact that's had. And so if you look at your business, like what's the one book that's made the biggest transformation or the biggest impact in your actual business?
It's a tricky question, right? Because so much is like context and timing. It's like that book was perfect at that time, but if I read it now, I think the one that's possibly that did have a huge impact, but is also to some degree largely like not dependent on time and events, is Anything You Want by Derek Sivers, which is funny because it is a relatively personal, like it's a summary of like all of his blog posts, and he's a just brilliant guy. But the reason why I picked that is it made me realize a few things about business. One being that you can just like everything that we hear about how to run a business and all these books, it's just a perspective. There's no right way of doing this, and you can kind of just make up your own rules. Like running a business is just a way of creating your own little world where it's your vision of how you want things to work. And for me that was just like just a relief. It was like, okay, like I don't need to subscribe to like, EOS and traction and scaling up and all these like frameworks that sure they're effective and they're great, but they're just a perspective. Like you can just make this stuff up and follow your intuition to what you think is right.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Marcus, man, for checking us out, for spending the time with us today. For everybody that wants to follow you, like where are you most active on social, or where should we send people in the show notes as well?
So ventureharbour.com is a good place. You can contact me through that site if you want to reach out. The ventures, we've got Serene, which is sereneapp.com, which we're looking for beta testers, brokernotes.co. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, man, I'm sure you got a lot of beta testers here from Digital Triggers. They'd be honored to be a part of it. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for stopping by. We appreciate it, and we'll have to get you back before 2021.
No, thanks, Joe. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, thanks, man. Appreciate it.